So some staggering figures on this fiscal snapshot. Was your party anticipating, though, for the numbers to be as high as what Minister Bill Morneau is now projecting?
We weren't taken by surprise because the government has been pretty open about where the money's been going. Certainly within the Finance Committee, Peter Julian, our House Leader, has done a remarkable job keeping us up to date on what that's looked like. So we weren't surprised. I think that what we saw yesterday indicates the scope of the severity of this pandemic and the crisis that we're facing.
Well, how does the government's COVID-19 report card read? How do you grade Ottawa's response to the pandemic?
Well, I think that there are things that happened in those first few months that are great. I feel really proud to be a member of the NDP because I feel like we were able to get the government to move a little further than maybe they would have gone. We were able to get wage subsidies at 75% instead of that 10% that they had initially come with. We were able to get CERB payments out to more people, to students, to seniors. It's so important that we're protecting families and businesses right now. That's the priority. So I think in that sense, we saw some great movement. We saw some great collaboration between all the parties, which is really important during a crisis. I think in terms of other areas, they weren't so strong. We are still waiting for support for people living with disabilities. We know there are still tons of people, particularly in Alberta, which was already deeply hit by the economic crisis, that did fall through the cracks, that weren't able to access those programs when they needed them the most. And frankly, they get a pretty failing grade in terms of revenue. We've seen the government fail time and time again to address tax havens and to make the ultra wealthy pay their fair share.
Yeah, I want to come back to that particular point in a second. What though are you looking for in terms of the status of emergency response benefits? How long should a program like CERB be extended?
Well, the priority, of course, is to make sure that we are not putting the burden of this pandemic on small businesses and on families. The priority is to make sure that we are not facing bankruptcies and closures of businesses. And so we need to do what has to happen now to make sure that those organizations and those individuals are protected. So we can't just turn off the lights. If you're working in a restaurant, even if your restaurant opens, people aren't eating out the same way. You're not going to be able to have the same income. There needs to be a plan for us to come out of this pandemic that needs to be as fulsome as the plan was when the pandemic was declared.
What's your assessment of the degree of federal help that has been and is being extended to Alberta through the pandemic?
There needs to be a lot more support for Alberta. We all know that in Alberta, we were already facing an economic catastrophe in January before the pandemic was even declared. We heard from Minister O'Regan that there would be help for Alberta, that there would be stimulus for Alberta's economy, and we need that desperately. We're seeing some really fundamental cuts at the provincial government level that are incredibly worrisome. And so the fact that we need our federal government to step up even more to protect our municipalities, to protect our universities, to make sure that Canadian families and Alberta families have jobs. Right now in Alberta, we've got a 15% unemployment rate, and that is something we can't keep that. We have to come up with a better solution.
Is that though the federal government's role to pick up the slack, to fill the gaps?
I think it is. I think there are places where the federal government's jurisdiction overlaps. I think in terms of support to the $14 billion of support that is going to the provinces, well, let's make sure there's some strings tied to that, because let's make sure that if we are giving money for healthcare, that it is going to a public, universal healthcare system that will support all Albertans. If we're making sure that there's funding going to childcare, let's make sure that those child care spaces are available in a public universal system. It's one of the biggest challenges we have coming out of this is how will women go back to work? How will families go back to work if we aren't seriously considering a national strategy for childcare?
All of this, of course, costs a lot of money. As we found out on Wednesday, the situation obviously is going to be around for some time, and will undoubtedly as well factor into the next federal election, whether that comes sooner or later. So how do you see your party potentially grappling with such a huge debt and deficit load were you to be elected into government?
Well, my first worry is the debt load of individual Canadians and individual Albertans. That's a big concern. And so we need to look at our revenue strategies as well. We constantly look at deficit, but we forget to look at the revenue. And when we're losing $25 billion a year to tax havens, so places where companies that are benefiting from working in Canada who aren't paying their fair share, who aren't paying their taxes, some of those companies accessed the COVID-19 supply, the funds to support them, and they're not paying their fair share. So they need to do that. And right now we've got web giants, we've got Amazon. The owner of Amazon may become a trillionaire. At the same time that Canadian families are having trouble, meeting their basic needs. They need to be paying taxes, and they're not. They're fitting through these loopholes and not having to pay their fair share. The ultra rich, if you make more than $20 million a year, I think you should pay a small amount, and that can bring in billions of dollars into our economy. These are simple things that the government should do if they actually were concerned about working class Canadians and working families, and not protecting the wealthy and the corporations.
Now, you rose in the House of Commons on Wednesday, calling for a recommitment to sustainable development goals. What are you looking for in that regard?
Well, I think what people are recognizing across Canada and around the world is that a lot of our problems that are facing humanity right now are global in scope. So we have a global pandemic, we have a global climate crisis, we are going to have a global economic crisis. We already have a global economic crisis. So our solutions need to be global. We need to start thinking about Canada and our role in the world. And now is not the time to look inward, to forget our roles internationally. We know that COVID-19 is not going to be solved in Canada until it is solved everywhere in the world. It didn't start in Canada, but the impacts have been enormous. We need to work together, and 1% of our spending should very easily be dedicated to that effort, I think. If we're going to give $750 billion to banks, we probably could give $1 billion to international development and to our supporting those who are most vulnerable in the world.
Well, it goes without saying, we are far from clear, obviously, of this pandemic. So how ready do you feel Canada is for that potential second wave of COVID-19?
Well, I think that there are some lessons that we learned from the first time around, and I certainly hope people are learning those lessons. I hope people understand the importance of wearing a mask. I hope people understand the importance of listening to our healthcare professionals. It's going to be a bit of a long haul. Until there is a vaccine, we will not be safe. We will not be able to do life as normal. And I think when I look at going forward, I look at how we can build back better, how we can make sure that the Canada that comes after COVID-19 is more equitable, more just, takes care of our workers, takes care of our seniors, takes care of those that are vulnerable in our communities.
And how do you see collaboration between the parties moving forward? You identified that earlier. Do you see that being sustained?
I would like to say that I see that being sustained, but I think that we have a situation where there is a pull towards an austerity model, which we've seen time and time again. Austerity doesn't work. It hasn't worked anywhere in the world. So this idea that we cut services, that we privatize, that we do all these things, I don't think is the solution. We've seen, after 2008, after the Second World War, a whole number of different times when we envision what we want our society to look like, and we build towards that, and we use imagination and innovation and think things through in a creative way, we really can come out of this in a better situation, in a better place where, inequality isn't so staggering, where women are able to participate freely and equally in the workplace, where our commitments to Indigenous people and to others in our community are recommitted to, I guess.
Ms. McPherson, good to get your perspective on this. Good to speak with you again. Thank you kindly.
Thank you. Nice to see you.